This is a guy we talked about on Monday, but I think it's worth revisiting exactly how we feel about him this week. And that's Woody Marks. Does he continue to ascend in week 5, right? Like, I don't think this is a surprise to people because he was one of the most added players on the waiver wire this week. But does he continue to get more work? Does he continue to be the guy? We know when it comes to rookie backs, like it isn't always just that clear, direct line to the top, right? There can be some twists and turns along the way. They can make mistakes when you have a veteran back like Nick Chubb there, who's probably going to do most things that coaches like, even though he doesn't necessarily have the skill or the athleticism to do what he used to do on the field. He'll be able to step in if we see Woody Marks making some mistakes. But that game last week, like, Marks looked fantastic. And going back and watching it more, man, like the 69 rushing yards, the touchdown, 17 carries, I think that's the big part because we knew that he had the receiving chops, right? 50 receiving yards and a score on 4 receptions. That's great. We knew he had that. We needed him to prove that he could be that sustaining running back, that he could be that guy that could take over that aspect. Last week, he certainly did, right? Played a season high 56% of the snaps. I mentioned on Monday the 21 touches. That's the most that any Texans back has had this year. And the Ravens defense is an interesting matchup because I think before the season, we would have said, man, this is a terrible team to go up against, and we would have loved to see him go against someone else. And yet right now, with how banged up the Ravens are, like they're uncharacteristically giving up the most fantasy points to running backs this season. And yeah, a lot of it came in that Lions game. You know, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, they each had 2 touchdowns, just totally crushed them in that game. But even like Isaiah Pacheco ended up with an okay fantasy line. I know it was kind of a, receiving touchdown that got him there, but James Cook, Quinshon Judkins, like a bunch of running backs have had decent fantasy days against this defense. And now with Lamar out, with these injuries on the defensive side of the ball, like the Texans are actually favored in this game by 2.5 points. Like who would have thought that after week 1, right? Nobody. It's been really, really a bad run out for the Ravens over the last few weeks here because of all these injuries and now probably not having Lamar. And yeah, I think Marks kind of almost looks like if he continues in this role, kind of almost looks a little matchup proof because he has those receiving chops. I think he's going to be able, it's almost like the Cam Scatterbo thing where if you're going to get that volume, you're going to be okay to put in fantasy lineups no matter what the game script ends up being. But here, it kind of looks like it could be a positive one for them. And that makes him a pretty solid RB2 for fantasy in my mind.
Yeah. Before the Woody Marks thing, I would have said this is a pretty classic stoppable force, movable object type game, right? Because the Texans running game has been so bad, but the Ravens run defense has been, you've been able to get them this year. That is certainly for sure. They rank 29th in EPA per rush allowed. They rank their bottom 5 in success rate as well. They've just been a team that you can run on this year because of all those injuries. Nnamdi Madubuike being out for the rest of the season, that's going to continue to happen. He's a difference maker on the inside. But then what Marks did, it was just like a breath of fresh air. I didn't come away from that thinking, oh man, this guy's the next great running back in the NFL. But specifically on gap runs where you saw him just get a crease and he could hit it. That's just something they have not had. Even with Joe Mixon, he was just kind of a steady grinder in the zone scheme that they had last year. That's kind of what Nick Chubb has been so far for them. Nick Chubb at this point in his career, Joe Mixon at that point in his career, they're not going to give you the explosive ability. I love DeMeco Ryans, but he's the head coach of the team. So to me, it's like the buck stops with you. Maybe it's a Nick Caley thing, keeping Woody Marks and these rookie receivers on the bench. I don't know. It is the offense feels very Patriots-y, and that is historically a tough offense to pick up and tough for the young players. But I definitely came away from that game being like, all right, why do we wait so long? Why do we wait so long to see Woody Marks? You traded up to get this guy. You traded a pick away from next year. What are we doing here? Because he immediately just gave their run game some life. And as a receiver, gave C.J. Stroud an option to get the ball out when he is feeling duress, which I think they need. They need more pressure answers on this team.
Well, and it seems crazy that we're kind of targeting the Ravens almost now for fantasy, right? But that's where it's gotten to with these injuries because they're top 5 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. And tight ends are 11th, so it's not even that far off. Like you could play everybody against the Ravens. You almost want to play everybody against the Ravens this year, and that it feels really strange, but that's where we're at. I would also say, I don't know what you feel like with Nick Chubb now, but I almost feel like he's just droppable. Like, unless you're holding him as like a one injury away guy, like we saw what he is in this offense. it is not going to be great for fantasy. So if you're holding on because of the name value, which I know a lot of people still do, I think you could drop him and try to find somebody with a little more upside on the waiver wire. Go out and get a Kendry Miller or somebody like that could maybe earn a bigger role and kind of has some more juice. Because, yeah, Nick Chubb, he's not dialing it back at any time soon.
No, I think it's over for Nick Chubb, unfortunately, which stinks because he's a player that was really enjoyable. Obviously, he was one of the best running backs in the league when he was at his peak. But yeah, even if Marks was to go down, we know what Nick Chubb looks like, and I think we know what that is for fantasy. It's probably not going to help you. But yeah, I'm interested to see what this Texans offense looks like in what suddenly does look like a gettable spot. I mean, even the Ravens are so banged up in the secondary. Roquan Smith wasn't playing good football, but he obviously is going to miss some time here. Kyle Hamilton picked up an injury this week. They're just decimated on both sides of the ball too. That's another thing for Woody Marks' favor. Cooper Rush is going to be starting this game against a defense that has Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson coming after him. So, like, I think we're going to see a lot of run first game scripts. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, like they're going to have to try to rely on Henry, but it just doesn't seem like Henry's necessarily been that guy this year. And maybe he's at a stage of his career where, like, without that threat of Lamar to potentially run the ball, like, what is Henry necessarily going to look like? Because he hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. We'll see if they have Ronnie Stanley this week, who's one of their best run blockers. Like, he's been injured. Will he be able to play in the game? I think he missed practice on Wednesday. I think he was back out there in a limited fashion. He's got an ankle injury, so we'll have to watch to see if he's going to play. That could be yet another loss for this offense, right? And yeah, if they can't get it going, if they fall behind, we've talked about it before, that just totally game scripts Derrick Henry right out of it. Like, he's not going to be involved enough in the passing game to come through for fantasy. So you need them to keep this close. You need him to kind of break a couple of those big runs. And without Lamar out there kind of drawing some attention away from the defense, I really question whether he's going to be able to do it. Now, Cooper Rush, I'll give him some credit. Like, I think he's a pretty good backup. Like, we saw him last year, right? He stepped in for Dak, like an injury spot there. He went 4-4. He had 3 fantasy finishes inside the top 15 fantasy quarterbacks. He had 5 inside the top 20. So fantasy-wise, you're not going to start him in like a single quarterback league, but 2 QB league super flex, you could potentially look to him. He'll keep the trains on time, but that's not what this offense needs. They need Lamar out there kind of elevating everybody. And now they're not going to get that from the quarterback position. You got to bump everybody down. Like, Zay Flowers was somebody who was like flirting with, top 12 fantasy wide receiver numbers a couple of weeks ago. Now you're moving him down to like low end wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 3 range this week. You're not really playing any of the other receivers in this offense. And even Mark Andrews, who had the big game a couple of weeks ago, we see Isaiah Likely come back. We see Isaiah Likely kind of eat into his snaps. And now you question again, is Mark Andrews more of just a streamer type, not necessarily somebody that you're going to feel great about putting out there as a top 12 fantasy tight end? So it's bad times, and it is a bad spot for this Ravens offense right now.
Yeah, I just want to note on their run game too, because when I was looking this up today, and I saw this was kind of a talking point on social media as well on Twitter, that they're last in the NFL in running back carries on first and second down, which is crazy to think. The Baltimore Ravens, their yards per carry is high, but when you parse that number out a little bit, so on, again, early down runs, first and second down, they're third in percentage of carries to go for 10 plus yards. 15.1% of their yards their carries have gone for 15 plus yards. But then they have they have a really high stuff rate as well, which is runs that go for 0 or negative yards. They have the 10th highest stuff rate. So they're just getting a lot or they're getting nothing in the run game right now. So it's just that's the Derrick Henry thing, and I feel like it is, to your point, it's going to be harder to get those big plays if you don't have Lamar Jackson there creating those runs. So the yards per carry looks good, but this is what happens when you average out 10-plus yard runs and 0-yard runs. You get somewhere between 5.5 and 6. So it's a tough spot for Derrick Henry. I continue to feel as if the vibes on just where Derrick Henry is going this year, not even for any reason of his own, just maybe some structural stuff, it's not very good. Let's go to another run game here for your 5th point. I have some thoughts on this one that I might be hypocritical from what how I sounded about it last week, but we'll get into it here. Hit us with this one.
Right. I want to know, is now the time to invest in the Commanders offense? And that might sound cheap because, Jaden Daniels looks like he's going to come back this week. So it's pretty easy to be like, oh, okay, let's invest in this offense right now. But with him returning, that's like the Lamar situation where he is out there kind of lifting all boats. I think he's going to come back and be fine. I think that's why they kept him out as long as they did. They wanted to make sure that he was going to be back to himself. They weren't going to trot him out there where he didn't necessarily have the same rushing ability. Now it looks like he's healthy. He's practicing in full. He comes back out there, goes right back to being a fantasy starter in your lineup. So no questions there. It is a tough matchup, like going against the Chargers. Like this will be a tough game for him. But I mean, we saw Jackson Dart last week have a pretty decent performance and run the ball against the Chargers defense. So I think it looks okay. We'll have to keep an eye on the receivers. Terry McLaurin probably not going to play this week, I don't think. Debo Samuel mispracticed on Wednesday with a new heel injury, and it wasn't just a rest day because they listed other guys like Zach Ertz as rest. They didn't list Debo as rest. They just put him down as heel, but he was back out there at practice today, so seems like he'll be fine to play. I have him as a high-end wide receiver too. We'll see if he sneaks into the low-end wide receiver 1 ranks this week, just based on the fact that he's kind of the guy in the passing game. Zach Ertz, who seems to find the end zone more often than not and score touchdowns when Jaden Daniels is out there. Now he gets Daniels back, so I think he's back in the conversation as a potential streamer, top 15 fantasy tight end. And then what you were alluding to, this backfield in Washington, right? Is Jacory Croskey-Merritt, is Bill Croskey-Merritt going to have the breakout? Is it coming here? Because right now, we're seeing a backfield like last week. It was divided in thirds, and we got all these guys involved. It wasn't just JCM. It was Chris Rodriguez. It was Jeremy McNichols. To me, it still seems like JCM is the best of these backs. And I know there's some people saying that, they're giving him more reps in pass pro. They're kind of getting him ready to potentially take over. Dan Graziano of ESPN had a report where he said that the team views him as a guy that could potentially break out in the second half of the season. When is this going to happen? Like we saw it happen with Woody Marks, where all of a sudden he got a ton of work last week. Could this happen at some point soon with JCM? I'm curious to hear your thoughts here, Harmon, on this backfield.
That's just it. That's what you said right there. It can just happen out of nowhere, right? And this is, I know last week I kind of poked fun at the Bill Bros, on Twitter. Like he just gets talked about way too much. It's kind of like, I do think the bit jumped the shark at one point where accounts are literally tweeting out how disgusted they are that Austin Eckler, a longtime veteran in the league, is getting how dare he get carries over this 7th round pick that you guys talk too much about in the offseason. So I do think the bit jumped the shark for a little bit there. But now let's come back to earth here for a second. He's a 7th round rookie. These guys this is the first time they played in the NFL. Breaking news. That's what rookie means. They need a little bit of time to ramp up here. I almost feel like now the sentiment is maybe coming a little bit too far. And I might be the one that's guilty of part of that, where the person who has him on the roster is probably getting annoyed with this. Like all these fantasy analysts talking about this guy with the funky 3 name and he's Bill, but his name, I don't even know what this is. Like he's a touchdown or bust guy. I can't trust this player in my lineup. Look at the snap share. It's split 3 ways completely. Here's the thing though. This running back ecosystem is good. They have the 4th best success rate on their running back runs at 46.5%. So while you can't play any of these 3 guys right now, Boone, if something happens, and guess what? Something always happens. The one rule in the NFL is chaos. That is the God here in the NFL. It is chaos, and everything revolves around chaos. So let's say Chris Rodriguez gets hurt. Let's say the coaching staff just sees a great week of practice from Bill Croskey-Merritt, and they're like, let's throw him out there. Let's get him a little bit more. I don't know if this is the matchup. The Chargers are kind of middle of the road in terms of run defense. They're a great pass defense, kind of middle of the road in the run defense department. But right now, among running backs with 20-plus carries, he has a 62.1% success rate, which is almost 10 percentage points higher than the next place guy, which is Jordan Mason. He's been great on his runs, and I'm telling people, like, what's success rate? NFL coaches are paying attention to success rate because it's how much yardage do you get based on the down and distance. That's how you calculate the metric. So I think they're seeing this too. So to me, he's a guy that you might want to throw in as that little sweetener in a trade. Like, okay, I want to do this guy for this guy, but just throw me Bill Croskey-Merritt. He's not getting you any points anyways. You're frustrated with him. I think I don't know if it's this week, but I think at some point it's coming for Bill.
I agree. I like him as a buy low right now because of what you said. You can probably get him very, very cheap and maybe even as a throw in a trade. The name value, it was kind of there a few weeks ago, but it's certainly probably dwindling. So right now, like I'm ranking him this week in that RB3 range. Don't really want to have to start him, but if there's spots where you do deeper leagues, you can put him out there, hope he hits the big play, or hope this is the week where they start to give him more work. Chris Rodriguez is like kind of that desperation flex. Unless he finds the end zone, you're not really going to be happy with what you get from him, but he is going to get some touches unless a big change happens in this game. And then McNichols is just a stash and not a very good one. Again, I would be looking more towards like younger backs who could potentially vault themselves into more work, kind of upside stashes versus somebody like McNichols.